Now, if you listen to the show, you know that I never once believed that the issue with Dave Hakstol was that he quote unquote lost the locker room. And we actually had Jordan Eberle weigh in on that. That being said, there are some realities about the situation now that the Seattle Kraken are Sans head coach that we have to talk about and that we will talk about on Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your team every single day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. It's a fast-paced game that lets you team up with your friends for tournaments, unlock awesome prizes, find unique stickers, and so much more. So download Monopoly Go free on Google Play or on the App Store. Again, my name, for those of us who are meeting for the first time, I should say, my name is Ayala, your host of Locked On Kraken. I'm also a writer and analyst for CBS Sports, covering the National Hockey League, but more specifically, women's basketball, NCAA, and of course, the WNBA. I've been your host here from the very beginning. I have several years of experience covering hockey, called a NHL game in New Jersey for the New Jersey Devils Radio Network. And speaking of radio networks, make sure you listen to local radio, because that's going to be, at least for this first segment, where we're going to stick. The work that local reporters and the local radio network are doing to give you a little bit of context, in this case for the Seattle Kraken. And so we talked about it last week, obviously when the news came out of Dave's firing, that I can understand, especially the way the Seattle Kraken's first 3 seasons have gone, why some might assume that it was a lost locker room. But you heard me talk about this after after the news broke. So on our short segment, our bonus episode, you heard me talk about it after the news, a little bit more of a deep dive. I can understand, and I think it's completely logical to think that a coach could lose the locker room. And I know people pointed to a game where I think maybe we were playing the Predators, but the Seattle Kraken, the team they were playing was huddled up, getting ready to game plan, and the Seattle Kraken really weren't. Dave was talking to someone. Was anyone listening to? Those are all snapshots and glimpses. But when I heard the reports from national media that there were conversations, that there were basically an ultimatum, that just didn't sound like the Seattle Kraken. Now, that's not to say, and I want to make this explicitly clear, as someone who is a national writer in another sport, I'm a local or team-specific writer in the NHL. But in most of the other leagues I cover, I'm a national writer, so I cover all of the teams. There are a few things at play here. First of all, just in sports media, whether we want to admit it or not, players are going to say what they want to say. Players, coaches, anyone that I interview, I'll put this on me. Anyone I interview at any point in time is going to say what they want to say. My job as a reporter is to then ask clarifying questions to the initial subject, but then also to try and fill in any gaps or discrepancies with conversations with other people. And sometimes even when you do that, you don't always get a story that aligns. And the best that you can do, at least my opinion is, and what I believe to be the standard of integrity, is to not make assumptions, but to give readers the facts. And then if I'm going to state my opinion, to make it explicitly clear that it is my opinion. More often than not, when I'm writing things, I don't give opinions. When I'm on a podcast, like on the Locked On Kraken podcast, the other women's basketball podcasts, or even when I'm an analyst on CBS Sports HQ, those are more opinion-based. But when I'm reporting facts, I do my best to get direct quotes. And if a quote that I have goes against facts that exist elsewhere, then I also add that. So, for example, this is literally a hypothetical and example. If I were to interview, I'm just going to say Jordan Eberle, because we're going to hear from him in a minute. And Jordan Eberle says, I never wear the color blue. It's not my favorite color. It doesn't match my skin tone or my eyes. And then I'm like, that's what Jordan Eberle said. He said that. It's a quote. But then I have a picture of him, or if I'm writing a story, I'll be like, said Eberle, and then something about how the Seattle Kraken home uniform is blue. 2 different shades of blue, as a matter of fact. Of course, this is a hypothetical. Jordan Eberle never said that. I want to be clear. Do not clip this and say Erica said, no. This is a hypothetical. That's just an example. And if you want to really read between the lines of what I'm saying, let's just say there was a group of brothers who said they never wore a Pride jersey, and so they didn't understand why it was such an issue that they didn't want to wear a Pride jersey, and then people pulled receipts on them because there are pictures of them with other teams in the NHL wearing a Pride jersey. So that's kind of where that example came from. Anyway. And then what are we to say? Am I calling Eberle a liar? I mean, I didn't write that. In the hypothetical, let me just be clear. We're still talking about the hypothetical. I'm not calling him a liar. I'm just saying this is what he said and this is what he's worn. You figure it out. So there's a little bit of that happens in sports media, and it's endlessly frustrating as a reporter, as a journalist, but it happens. There are also times where I'll stick with the women's basketball, and actually a player that is now retired but played for the Seattle Storm. And a good friend of mine reported that her agent was saying, this athlete is hurt, won't play, won't start the season on time. I don't think it was explicitly reported that they would miss like the season or something. And that athlete went on social media and denounced the reporting that a friend of mine in the business had done. Then a couple of weeks later, the team announced that that player was going to miss time because of an injury that had already been reported by the reporter, but the athlete themselves was kind of like #fake news. Why am I saying all of this? How does this relate to what's going on with the Seattle Kraken? What do we know? We know that Emily Kaplan is reporting that she has sources saying that there was a little bit of an ultimatum, especially from, I forget the terminology she used, but she alluded that it was kind of marquee, important players for the Seattle Kraken. So Eberle could be among those players if we make some assumptions. Maybe she's, maybe that's alluding to captains, alternate captains. Maybe that's alluding to players that have been extended. Eberle can fall into that. Maybe that applies to players who have impact on the ice. I mean, whatever the case is. And so that's what we got from ESPN. Now, when you do reporting, and especially if you're not talking either on the record or if you're talking on what is quote unquote known as on background, meaning that someone's willing to have a conversation with you, but they don't want it attributed directly to them. They don't want you using direct quotes. They're giving you information, quote unquote, on background, so then you can do more reporting. So you can have an off-the-record conversation, which is just 2 people talking, things that will never be directly reported. You can have an on-background conversation, which effectively means, hey, I'm telling you this so you can do a little bit more digging, but do not directly quote me. And then, of course, you have something that's on the record. So it sounds like, at minimum, what Emily Kaplan got was on background. Now, whether she was talking directly to players or to agents or to people close to the Seattle Kraken, she did not divulge, at least on the national television hit that I saw. Then we have Ron Francis the very next day, earlier in the day, the same day that Emily Kaplan reported, saying something completely different. So several hours before Emily Kaplan's report, Ron Francis talked to local media and said, hey, this is not something that came from exit interviews. He was asked about losing the locker room. Vince Dunn several days earlier was asked about Dave Hakstol losing the locker room. So in national media, Emily Kaplan is reporting. Local media, for days leading up to the firing, is hearing other things. And so it gives us this situation where, is anyone quote unquote lying? I don't know. Is anyone given false information or inaccurate information? It sounds like that's more of a possibility. But as I've said, now this is where we get into my opinion, because this is a podcast. My opinion was, when I heard the reports, it just didn't sound like how the Seattle Kraken operate. That being said, and I want to say this explicitly clear, when you have exit interviews, these are one-on-one conversations. So in theory, unless, let's just use Eberle as an example, unless Jordan Eberle is talking to his teammates after the exit interviews about his exit interview, and then those teammates are talking, are doing the same, I'll put it this way. There is a reality that exists where Eberle truly believes, because of what he experienced and and conversations that he had with his teammates, that he doesn't think anyone threw Dave Hakstol under the bus. There's also a world that exists in where either he didn't talk to everyone, or maybe he talked to someone and they either dismissed the question or they said one thing, but that wasn't necessarily exactly what actually happened in their exit interview. So you can see my bullet point for this first segment. What is the truth? I don't know. But what I do know is that Eberle has spoken on the matter. Our beautiful, again, local reporting from the Kraken Audio Network picked this clip up from Jordan Eberle on the Hakstol situation.
You, Jordan Eberle, in your exit meeting, did you or any of your teammates that you know of go in and say to Ron Francis, "We want Dave Hakstol out"?
No, I mean, I heard that, and I was watching the game, and I was extremely disappointed. I think at the end of the year, every team goes through it. You go and you do an exit meeting with the coach, you do an exit meeting with the general manager, and you're honest. The whole goal of that is trying to get better. You're trying to adjust things, whether yourself personally with the team, what we can do, but by no means did anybody go in with an ultimatum. It's just not how our team operates. It's not how our group operates. I was very disappointed in that, and I felt bad for Hack, because we hold him in high regard, and obviously 3 years that we've had, we took a massive step last year and getting to the second round, and he's a big part of that. So this year obviously didn't go the way we wanted it to, and I think the biggest thing is you go into those year-end meetings and you're trying to figure out how we can be better, and you express whatever it may be. But like I said, by no means did anyone go in with an ultimatum that if he was gone, that they were going to be gone. That's just not how we operate as a group and as an organization.
And so there you go. That's what Eberle is saying. And as someone who covers the team, and I'm very honest with the fact, and a lot of y'all know, I'm not in Seattle every practice, every game, absolutely not. But I listen to the team talk a lot. I catch up with the players when I am in market, or when I catch them on the road. And how do I want to say this? There are things publicly that the Seattle Kraken just do a certain way. And then there are things that, as you're around the Kraken, it's not that they don't uphold what you kind of see as the public facing thing, but it's a little bit more nuanced, right? So to say that the Seattle Kraken gave an ultimatum, that didn't sound like the Seattle Kraken. Now, if there were players saying that they were disappointed in how the season went, even if I heard that there were players saying, yeah, that at times there was frustration, maybe the communication wasn't where they wanted it to be, all of those things, if they can give critiques, and I hope, as you heard Jordan say, that's a time to be honest, in the hopes of getting better for next year. So if there was an honest conversation about, hey, this wasn't working for us as a team, this method of communication, this many days off, this many days without a day off, all of those should be constructive criticism. And so maybe that got misconstrued, lost in translation, however you want to say it. But I thought it was a little bit much to say it was an ultimatum, but that's not to say that there wasn't criticism. And I think very for very good reason. There should be criticism of this team. We're going to talk about our affiliates for the rest of this episode, but I want to put a pin in this because for the rest of the week, we're going to get into this. We have games, as you'll hear later in the show, Wednesday in the ECHL and the AHL playoffs that we're going to focus on. But for tomorrow's episode, for Tuesday's episode, my plan is to dig deeper into this. So let me know what your burning questions are regarding what is the truth? What's happening with the Seattle Kraken? And I want to take you over to some reports that the Seattle Times has done and break some of that down, because some of this is just about the Seattle Kraken are in arguably either a very vulnerable, but either way, a very transformative time in the franchise. And just like getting rid of Dave might be what they felt they needed to do, the next step, and we talked about this already. Jeff Baker wrote about this. We talked about it. The next step, or really steps for the Seattle Kraken, are critically important and will instruct where the Kraken feel they need to change team and franchise culture to meet their goals. Again, the next step and steps, so not just the head coach, but all of the moves that are happening in the offseason will be indicators of how the Seattle Kraken plan to make changes to their culture and what perhaps they felt wasn't working and what they need to focus on to be successful. So we're going to talk about that. But coming up next on Locked On Kraken, let's get into Kansas City Mavericks Monday and a little bit of a dash of a Firebird Friday, because both of our teams have played 2 games and both of our teams are going to host Game 3 in their respective playoffs. We're going to talk about that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That is the formula for winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED lights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. The eBay Guarantee Fit is only available for U.S. customers. And thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Want to remind you that the Locked On NFL mock draft is available. Now, of course, the picks are in, but it's always good to go back and reflect. And hey, some picks people are big mad at, but now that we're getting some of these players into market, how is it going to play out? So make sure you check out the Locked On NFL mock draft, available now on Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. All right. We had the ECHL and AHL playoffs round 2 underway. And as you know, because we've had Tad O'Had on the show a few times and hope to have him on again, our ECHL affiliate, the Kansas City Mavericks, swept the Tulsa Oilers in round 1 and are taking on the Idaho Steelheads in round 2. Now, we talked about this last week, but the games started Friday and Saturday respectively for the Kansas City Mavericks and for the Coachella Valley Firebirds. We'll talk about the Firebirds in the next segment, but let's start with the ECHL. So, against the Steelheads, the Kansas City Mavericks got an early jump on the Steelheads, and they were able to do so by getting going late in the first and then carrying that momentum. Hey, Dave always talks about momentum not carrying over from game to game, but definitely from period to period. And that's exactly what happened in this game. But what we also saw is the physicality very different than what we saw against the Tulsa Oilers. In this game, the penalty minutes for the Steelheads, 12 PIMs for them, 22, almost double, 22 for the Kansas City Mavericks. And, we talked to Tad, there's already a suspension served in game one. So this is going to be a physical series. Loved the hop that the Mavericks had later in the first period, carried that momentum, even got a shorthanded goal in the second frame. And then, it was Cale Morris, who is in net. And just a few things that the Steelheads were able to do, including scoring on the power play, but also beating him quick with a quick wrister on his glove side. So that's something I want to keep an eye on. But the Mavericks do hold on to take game one 4-2. Shots on goal for the Kansas City Mavericks, 33-26 for the Idaho Steelheads. Again, that was Morris in net. And just want to note that the Mavericks, 22 penalty minutes that they served, but they were 0-4 on the power play. So it was a perfect PK for the Idaho Steelheads. I mentioned, had a power play goal, but they were 1-4. So a pretty decent PK on the side of the Mavericks as well. But with the with a perfect PK for the Steelheads, that gave them, they were 16 out of 16 going into game 2 on Sunday against the Kansas City Mavericks. And this one was a back and forth game, but ultimately, the Mavericks getting a hot start, the Steelheads had a strong finish in this one, and they were able to get 2 unanswered goals in the third period to take a 3-2 win. Jack LaFontaine was in net for the Kansas City Mavericks. So that's something I'm going to ask Tad about. We've talked about it. He felt that he has the, quote, luxury to be able to use both netminders. And we'll see if that's something that's going to continue, especially, again, given some of the little tweaks that I saw, or maybe the Steelheads being able to pick their corners specifically against Morris. So the next game is Wednesday. Also the next game for the Firebirds, as we'll talk about in the next segment, also on Wednesday. But penalty minutes, 17 for the Steelheads to 11 for the Kansas City Mavericks. So I like that we clean that up. Still a lot of penalty minutes for both teams. The power play, 0-2 for the Steelheads. So we did a better job on the PK. 1-5, though, for the Kansas City Mavericks. And that's something that I want to ask Tad about. What is different about this PK for Idaho than what they saw against the Tulsa team? And what are some adjustments that he thinks, if any, that his team has to make? Shots on goal, I mentioned that for the first game. Shots on goal for this game, game 2, that the Mavericks dropped 32 shots on goal for the Steelheads to 29 shots for the Kansas City Mavericks. So it's not a huge discrepancy there. But I don't have heat maps for these games, but I think it might be interesting to see the heat maps here. So going into game 3, the Mavericks will host that game. I believe the games are on the 8th and the 10th this week. And there's a little bit of work to do. This is a different Idaho team, but remember, we talked about the matchups, whether they're going to play Allen and Idaho, and these have been high-scoring series with either opponent. But, of course, now we know the opponent is Idaho, so those are some of the things that I'm going to talk to Tad about, but let me know in the comments, are there things that you want to know about this Kansas City Mavericks team, but specifically this matchup against Idaho as they look to advance in the Kelly Cup playoffs? Coming up next, we're going to talk about the Calder Cup playoffs and, of course, our Coachella Valley Firebirds. Don't go anywhere. This episode of Locked on Kraken also brought to you by our new friends at Monopoly Go. Now, listen, I've talked about if you are a competitor, you definitely want to check out Monopoly Go. And I actually downloaded Monopoly Go. I'm in New York, back home, because my sister had her bachelorette, and we got some things to get ready for the wedding later this week. And so I wanted to have some stuff that I could use on my mobile device while I'm moving around town. And I thought, hey, why not Monopoly Go? Well, let me tell you, when they say this is for competitors, this is for gamers, it's for real. I've told you that you can do bank heists. You can also like knock down as people are trying to build their empires in different either real cities or kind of like Camelot is one of the cities, Rio de Janeiro is one of the cities. Obviously one's more fictional and one's an actual city, but people are knocking down your bridges and statues and stuff like that. You get booted off the board after you pay your rent on a property. It's pretty intense. There are also, though, ways that you can collaborate, whether it's through collecting unique stickers or and trading those with friends or kind of working with friends. I think it's pretty cool. So it definitely feeds the competitive edge, but also if you're a little bit more community based, it's got something for you as well. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. And so with that, I say game on. Let's get back to talking about our Coachella Valley Firebirds. Thanks as always for making Locked on Kraken a part of your daily destination. All right, we talked in the last segment about the Kansas City Mavericks, who now, with the series tied, are going to host the Idaho Steelheads. Well, what if I told you it's a very similar scenario for our AHL team? That's right, the Coachella Valley Firebirds had a first-round bye, so these are their first two games in the playoffs. We saw Chris Drieger in net for both games. He saved 23 of 25 in game one. I'll talk to you about that in a minute. And then 30 of 33 in game two. So Drieger going the distance for the Coachella Valley Firebirds. We saw that, Joey Daccord was able to do that last year. Game one actually went to the Calgary Wranglers. 4-1 loss by the Seattle Kraken affiliate in the AHL. Of course, our Coachella Valley Firebirds. Now, we outshot Calgary 36-27. Penalty minutes much lower than the ECHL series of our affiliate. 8 penalty minutes for the Firebirds, 6 for Calgary. Now, the Firebirds 0 for 3 on the power play, but they also were 4 for 4 on the PK, aka Calgary was 0 for 4 on that one. So, 4-1 loss, you shake it off. John Hayden was actually on the Kraken Radio Network talking a little bit about this series, so you can go check that out. But, hey, you haven't played in a while. Also, remember our Mavericks had several days off. They actually won game one, but they also had some days off. So maybe the back-to-back, getting back into the swing of things. Both of these teams have a little bit of adjusting to do that their opponent might not necessarily have to. And if you remember, if you're an everydayer or OGer, you know that we talked to Tad about that. He said you can find positives on both sides, whether you are well rested going into a series, you can find positives in going right into another series, and the same goes for finding negatives or downsides. There are negatives to having so much time off with not game repetitions, and then there are also negatives to going right into a series, especially at this time of year where we also talked to Tad about, hey, no one's 100% healthy. So, I think we take that with a grain of salt, especially knowing that the Firebirds were able to get it done in game two. As a matter of fact, someone that you might recognize from the Seattle Kraken, the one and only Devin Shore, gets an OT winner. I believe it was at around the 7-minute mark, 7:30 something, I think. He gets the game winner. I already told you 30 saves for Chris Drieger in this game. 4-3 overtime win against the Calgary Wranglers to take the series or to tie the series ahead of it coming to the Valley. Shots on goal were 30 for Calgary, 33 for the Firebirds. Penalty minutes, we hit double digits, 10 for us, 6 for the Wranglers. 0 for 5. So the PK is looking good for our affiliates. I love to see that. I absolutely love to see that. PK looking good. Still need some work, though, on the power play. We were 0 for 3 in game 1, 1 of 3 in game 2. So let's go 2 of 3, right? In game 3, which will be on Wednesday, which also happens to be my birthday. Happy birthday to me. I get to see both of our affiliates play postseason hockey, and I'm super excited. But don't forget, on tomorrow's episode, the plan is to do a little bit of a deeper dive into what really has to happen for the Seattle Kraken, and why is this coaching change maybe not so much. As I kind of said, I don't believe that this is just about Dave Hakstol not doing a great job. There's a lot of nuance, and a lot of people, and I've been reading the comments, and I'll do that again on tomorrow's show, because a lot of people in the comments who aren't like Flyers fans coming to, talk trash about Hack, we know, Kraken fans know, there's nuance to this. Some people say the nuance or know about the nuance, but also think that the firing was good. Some people know about the nuance and they don't like the firing. I think both are valid points, and we really won't know until we know who the next coach is. But again, it's not just the head coach, it's the decisions that the organization, Ron Francis and company, are going to make that are going to give us instructions and directives and hints as to not only what the problem was or how they perceive the problem, but also what we can expect. Ultimately, what I'm saying, too long didn't read, too long didn't listen, too long didn't watch, changes are coming for the Seattle Kraken. Culture changes, perhaps, but business changes, mentality, really, the changes are going to set the tone, are going to reset the tone for the Seattle Kraken. And I'm very curious to see who makes the cut, so to speak, and who the Kraken move on from, to say that, hey, we're about business, getting to the playoffs, and as a one and done is not what we want. We've talked about that since before the team even played its first game. So now it's time to get serious. And I have some things that I think if the Kraken are serious about getting serious, they need to address. I don't know that we're ready to have those conversations. It seems like we're doing all the eggs in the offensive basket. I get it. I understand it. I know how sports work these days. And let's be clear, some of these decisions are also thinking about the bigger picture, not just the wins, losses, but the game that you have to play in public, in the media, in marketing. And all of that is on the table right now for the Seattle Kraken after what was a very disappointing season. All right, we've got a lot to talk about this offseason, including keeping an eye on not one, but 2 playoff races. So, as I always say, be kind to yourself, be kind to one another, hold fast, stay true. Let's go Kraken, get fired up, and make sure you're also rooting for the Mavericks. I will catch you on the next episode, folks. Peace out, everybody.